at home there, you'll be able to see what's happening. And I'm going to be kind of the cat herder tonight. I'm going to be your MC. So if you're up there, I will still see you when you have questions to ask. So if we can get our panelists down here, because I'm feeling very lonely and sad, we're going to sit on the couch. Come on, Brett. Don't be shy. Okay. Stuart, where are you hiding? Patrick. They're coming very slowly. Yeah. Just to make my life easier, if you want to swap it, so I can get a short mic. Yeah. I mean, you can just be loud. I do loud really well, but so, Andrew, do you need to start the LinkedIn Live? Or is it just okay. Audio's recording, video's recording. Okay. Oh, look at you guys up there. Oh, that's scary. If I get a little too close to that speaker, things are going to get really nasty. Keep it back. Yeah. Okay. Now, a couple of things. In case you haven't figured it out yet, the little white door at the back is the toilets. That was beautifully done. I paid him a lot of money to do that, but I think I got value out of it. Yeah, cool. Okay. So, next, I think I will hand this to Brad, who's going to do our acknowledgement of country, because he does it so elegantly, and I don't.
Thank you, Keith, and good to be here. And thanks, Andrew, for organising this. Yeah, it's really nice to start by and acknowledge that we are on Whadjuk Noongar land, the way, and acknowledge that this land was never ceded, but it's been a land with an extraordinarily long history. And while I know that speaking to elders in this place, they would say Kaya Wanju to Whadjuk Budja, in terms of, well, hello and welcome to Aboriginal land. It's important that we acknowledge that we are on land and pay our respects to elders past and present. And Keith, I'll hand back to you to do the other introductions.
Okay, so I think I might introduce us as we go, so we don't build up too much anticipation and you get too excited. But I am going to hand over in a moment to Stuart. Now, just a question before we get started. I know that there are people out in the world who are so competitive that they get really excited when their energy bill arrives and it's bigger than the month before. Because that means they've won. Now, is there anyone here who is like that? No, that's good, because you would be in the wrong place. Okay, so Stuart is both the builder and the developer of this building. Probably most of you know him, but I'll do this anyway because it's fun. Sorry, got to back up again. What we're going to do is each of these people is going to talk for 5 minutes. I'm going to be really fierce about time. But we're not going to take any questions till the end. What I'm trying to do is drive them through to speak quickly and efficiently so that we have a big hunk of time for questions at the end. So think about your questions and hold on to them. Okay. I think they've already figured it out. If you haven't figured out that the stairwell is just there, it's just there. So you can go up the stairs. Don't try and go through the whiteboard like the Kool-Aid man. It's not a good look. You will be embarrassed. It's much too strong. Right, so Stuart, he is both the builder and the developer, which I'm assuming meant that he spent a lot of time arguing with himself and saying rude things to himself about himself. I met Stuart for the first time the other night, and one of the things that I really admired about him was his willingness to take on a risk of 3 things that have never been done in this state before. No one has built a mid-rise timber frame building. No one has gone for a NABERS 6-star. And there was a 3rd thing, but it doesn't matter. But it was really exciting. And what he kept talking about was risk and taking on risk, and that for him, risk sounded a lot like a really nice single malt whiskey. And on that tasteful note, Stuart.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I suppose just I'll mention quickly. So I had a job in commercial construction, tier 2 building company, where I was at every stage a site manager, contracts administrator, project manager. Then I went corporate into development, became a development manager, and then having got across all kinds of number of things, I have a degree in industrial design technology, so I sort of have a very broad, sort of jack of all trades, master of some. And that's kind of the idea. That way, arming myself with as much knowledge across as many disciplines as possible helps me to understand a problem. And as we all know, risk and the value of that risk corresponds to your understanding, because we always fear what we don't understand. And fear is intrinsically linked to risk. So the idea is to, by understanding a problem, you reduce its risk profile and therefore realise value in it where other people see more. So just to give you a bit of background of the process, so I was sitting in my corporate job on St George's Terrace, and they were looking at timber construction, and they just didn't quite have the guts to go ahead with it, and they were speaking to the builders, and the builders were saying, oh, don't know if we can do this. And I said, look, this isn't rocket science, I'll do it. And they said, well, we can't do that. And I said, okay, fine. I quit the job, sold the house, bought this block, and did it. And the wonderful thing about this block is that the government at the time were calling for alternative construction methodologies, and this was a relatively small block that would still allow a medium-rise 4-storey building. And that was due to the foresight at the time of MRA and the development of the planning in this area. So that was pretty fortunate. Having done that, we got on site and prior to that, we went through the DA process and engineering and design and architecture, and I had a lot of obstacles. DFES were trying to say, no, don't do this. I had the engineers saying, can we do this bit in block work? Can we do this bit in concrete? I had the architects questioning it every step of the way, and kept saying, no, you can do this. It is a national construction code. It is done everywhere else in the country, every day of the week. It's not rocket science. We can do this. So I also went to a lot of funding places, 15 places for funding for construction finance, and they all went, oh, I don't know. In the end, I had RAC Finance with some guys from over east who are here in WA, and they said, yeah, sure, fantastic, timber construction, not a problem. So I got lucky in that sense, but had to overcome a lot of these obstacles. And then once we did that, we got on site, and I was very lucky to have a good mate of mine who's a carpenter. We teamed up together. So I took on his risk as a subcontractor, because as you know, developers push risk to builders, who push risk to subbies, and at the bottom of the stack, they mark it up because they don't want to take the risk. So by taking on the risk of all 3 levels, I could get everyone on board. And so in the porta cabin out there on the site over the road, the government lent to me. We were down here every day, and we did this 30% faster than the standard build. It was 10 months from the day we put up the fence to the day we hit PC. We would do it, I would estimate, roughly 7% more cost effective than a standard build. And we outperformed in terms of thermal, acoustic, performance, and then sustainability. We're trying to develop a sustainable construction methodology. It's not just about timber, and we also buy our timber locally and all this sort of stuff, but we're introducing other elements like recycled permeable paving outside, so that the water soaks into the water table and doesn't get into the rivers and streams and this sort of stuff. Now that's when Andrew comes in, because Andrew and Steve, they came to me and said, through James Clark, who's here this evening, made the introduction, and they said, let's do a solar system. And we were just about starting construction. No, we were part way through it, weren't we? We were part way through it. these guys say, let's do this. And then even then, after we got further down the track, they said, let's do batteries. And I said, okay. And we signed a great big document, which I promptly signed and then never looked at again, and said, if you stuff this up, you're coming down with me. But they went every step of the journey with me, and they were fantastic to work with. Great guys. The building's been in operation for well over a year now. Couldn't recommend them more. Already recommending them to other clients of mine, because I did this for myself, but I also manage other people's developments for them as a development manager or a construction project manager. And already getting Andrew and Steve involved on at least a couple of other much bigger projects than this. So I was very glad that they persuaded me to do this, but I could see the merit in what they were attempting to do, and I look forward to them growing from strength to strength in the future. I'm very pleased to have them here in the building as well, which is more than appropriate. And yes, so thank you very much, and I look forward to more in the future, and any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. That was a rapid journey. Probably wasn't a lot of sleep in that 12 months, but yeah, it went fast. So next we have Andrew. We're in Andrew's office. It looked a lot more like an office when I arrived here an hour ago. Yes, you could read over here what he does, but yeah, so he is the co-director of Element 47, but you knew that, and they specialize in embedded networks, and Australia's first peer-to-peer network mapping real-time consumption of power, which I find fascinating. You turn on the DVD and it's like, whoa, what's going on? And yeah, the cool thing that they've done here is allowing bulk buying power. So they're buying for this whole building the power as a wholesale unit. And you know, I'm from New York. Our favorite phrase is, I can get it for you wholesale. He's the guy to talk to. Okay. Andrew.
Thanks, Keith. So this has been a real long journey. I really appreciate Stuart and James for the introduction, and Stuart for signing that lengthy contract. When we first came across Stuart, we said, oh, look, we can definitely put solar on, and then we'll do a bit of an energy model, and we'll take a look at how much energy the building's using. And we think it needs batteries, because people will work during the day, and they just don't use power during the day. So it was a different model to what most solar companies were saying to people at the time, and most companies are just like, just put on some solar and it'll be alright, without much science behind it. So we went to a lot of detailed modelling, and we went to a lot of risk, and Steve and I put our own money into purchasing the solar and battery storage system in the building, which we'll take a look at afterwards, which is 30 kilowatt hours of solar and 20 kilowatts of solar and 30 kilowatt hours of storage. And the building had already come with a metering system or an embedded network, which the engineers that Stuart engaged had kindly put in SATEC meters, which enabled us to then connect them to Power Ledger. And we went through a lengthy process getting Stuart over the line without telling him it was the first time it's ever been done in Australia and that no one had commercially done this before, and this being a commercial project. So we really appreciate that, and we put our money where our mouth is, and we got the job done, and 12 months later it's been NABERS rated, thanks to Patrick. So this is a 6-star NABERS rated apartment building, but I'll let Patrick go into that in a bit more detail. So it's got a lot of features with energy efficient design and sustainable design, right through from the low carbon concrete and the timber producing low embodied carbon, and we thought, well, this is a really good project for us sort of join and pitch in on. And since this project's come about, we've then been able to demonstrate this, and now we're deploying it from 9 apartments in this commercial tenancy to 430 properties down at Witchcliffe Eco Village. So we're actually able to scale this now, and that's 30 basically miniature communities like this. And the batteries are a lot bigger, so down there we're at Tesla Power Packs, which is the ones that CNG rolls out. So we're managing microgrids down there, so we're really starting to grow our capabilities, and on the back of the sort of research work and government projects, these are now fully commercial independent projects. And yeah, really pleased to be here, really pleased to see you all come along and have a listen. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions at the end.
No, that is a beautiful thing. You give somebody 5 minutes and they speak for 4. You don't see that at the TED Talks, do you? We saw it here first, here in Midland. Next up, we have Patrick. Now, Patrick is a remarkable man because he is the only person I have ever met who could explain the neighbor's rating system in English. Actual English that I could understand. I've had lots of people try and explain the neighbors, and I was like, I recognize some of those words. So, yes, here's a man who did the energy rating on the building, and he will explain it to you in a language you can understand.
Thank you, Keith. English, sorry, I'm Swiss German, so you'll have to live with my accent. I've also come from the terrace. I love single malt whiskey, so I left the terrace and started working with Perspective a year ago because we want to do the hard stuff. And we don't want to rate the 0 and the 1 and the 2-star buildings. We actually want to rate the 6-star buildings and maybe take them to 7 stars once that exists, because that's where we'll have truly net zero outcomes. And that's what we're here for today. And I'm going to tell you why this 6-star here is part of this net zero journey as well. So Andrew brought me in because although he is a neighbor's assessor himself, he couldn't rate himself here really. So thanks for the opportunity. It was interesting. We've never done a neighbor's rating of a power ledger monitored building. The data I got, they were just so different. And I probably spent 3 times longer than a normal building to calculate the rating. But it was very interesting because that's the future. I think if you want to take things further, you need to have very minuscule, very detailed data so that you know what's actually happening and you know how you can further tune and improve a building and add technology, etc. So, if we had put in a normal metering system with normal data, this building would have rated 4.5 stars, which is good. It's above average. It's actually a sign of very good efficiencies. It's a sleek building. There's no cinema here. There is no common refrigerator somewhere. There's just a naturally ventilated car park with some stackers and 1 lift and a few LED lights. So that helps. But I think what's really interesting here is that we have solar panels, and whilst the solar produces a lot during the daytime, which the building, including all the residents, doesn't need, a lot of it would go out to the grid at no benefit, and on the neighbors you can't even account for it. So the fact that the batteries are in there, they've further helped, so that this building is not just another 30% more efficient than the 4.5 stars, it's actually 60% more efficient. So that's pushing us beyond the 2030 potential target of taking things 50% down, so that by 2050 it can be down to zero. This building is already at 60% down in 2021. And it can not only be done for new buildings, it can be done for any existing building. And there's a few people in here who have other technologies also, so go and talk to them. If you don't find them, come and talk to me or talk to the others. There's so much stuff out there that if we put it together and collaborate, we can do it, especially in Perth. It's easy. The money's there, the sun's there, the wind's there. The innovators are here. I think this is it.
That is really exciting. Is anybody else really excited about this? Yeah, I see some nodding heads. I love this. Now, you can be more excited. You don't have to just leave that for the Americans. Grab yourself a name tag. Come in, make yourself at home. You can actually go up to the balcony that's the more expensive seats, but yeah, we'll bill you later if you want the best view. So last but not least is Brad. Now, Brad, everybody knows Brad. Brad was the mayor of Fremantle for 11 and a half years. He tells me he wanted to stay being the mayor of Fremantle and also be the only Green senator in Western Australia, but they wouldn't let him do both. So here he is, being just one. And prior to that, he was a sustainability lecturer at Murdoch. And the thing I like about Brad is that he actually lives what he's talking about, because I always, when he was in Fremantle, was riding his bike around him. He was not going from place to place in the Mercedes limousine like all the other politics around. Here he is, Brad.
Thank you, Keith. Much appreciated. And guys, I feel like I'm following on from people who are much more expert. I'll go forward. But I was really interested, and when Andrew and I first had this conversation in this space, there was a really, and I think, important opportunity. And I guess the context for this is now that I'm in the State Parliament, seeing the opportunity for change, and also hearing about projects like this, which, as we just heard, are ahead of where in terms of meeting the carbon neutral targets, getting our emissions down, showing what needs to happen, which is really, really exciting. And we're seeing really good examples like this here in Midland. We're seeing some great examples happening in places like Freo. My question was, well, why isn't this the new normal? Why do we have these kind of places of excellence like this? And what are the blockages? So I didn't actually want to talk for very long, because what I'm trying to get an understanding of and hope that we can do. And the conversation with Andrew and I was, we've got Glasgow, obviously Glasgow starting this weekend, COP26, the world trying to get itself to match emissions targets that match the science of what we need to do to keep a climate that is, contains temperatures to 1.5 degrees. How do we make sure that the building sector is such an important part of that transition? And how do we speed that up? I guess I'm really interested in what we can do together, what I can do in the State Parliament, what we can do at other levels to actually make really excellent projects like this the new normal, the new standard here in WA. So for me, this is such an exciting time. I think these are the kind of conversations that we need to be having. In fact, I was saying, Andrew, we have to do this before COP, because I think this is the kind of stuff that we actually need to actually make sure is part of this conversation as we think we go towards what I hope is a really pivotal moment in terms of getting carbon emissions down around the globe, and WA playing its role. So thanks, and I feel like you guys know much more about this than me, but I'm really keen to kind of hear ideas around what more we can do, and that was actually part of the conversation I'm looking forward to coming up. So back to you, Keith. Thank you.
So I really want questions. We were going to get the speakers to speak much longer, but I said no. We've going to have an audience. I'm really bossy. You know what it's like with Americans. we're going to have a really smart crowd here. And so the questions from the floor are really going to be what's driving it. So does anybody have a burning question they want to start with? Or am I going to have to use the questions that I wrote down earlier? Okay, yes.
I think it might be good for you to get the state government set some target at least for their own buildings to begin with.
So if I heard the question right, around getting the state government to set targets. Yes. So one thing I failed to mention was I did introduce legislation about a fortnight ago, which I think was the start of our conversation in some ways, which I said, which was acknowledging that the state government has committed to an aspiration, not a target, an aspiration for net zero by 2050, which is good. So, but I put forward some legislation that said, well, let's set some firm targets for this decade, because actually this is the decade that matters. So the legislation I put through was 50% reductions based on science, as we've been talking about, by 2030, and a 90% renewable energy outcome as well by 2030. I didn't get a very enthusiastic response from the state government, but they did say to me, we're not going to support your bill, but we will bring back our own targets after COP. Now, I know what those targets will be. I did kind of think that the point of COP was government showing leadership, not responding, but putting that aside, but you're right. And I would actually be really interested to hear from people, how important do you think that governments, both here in WA and nationally, setting targets would be in terms of actually kind of putting the rocket up your industries in terms of getting carbon emissions down?
If it isn't written down, it's not measurable. Let's have some numbers.
I think it's all up to us to put pressure on the government to accept certain targets. Otherwise, they will just keep talking and nothing will happen even after 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and WA emissions are going up, so we are going in another direction.
And I think the target's probably good because they might help like Stuart's roadblocks. Clearly, he had quite a few of those, and obviously that's through the whole planning stage, and that's the critical part, isn't it? And then the lenders, obviously, acknowledging the whole loan process. There's a whole stack that will then hopefully fall into line.
There's two ways to go and get people to move in a certain direction in the commercial context, and that is you legislate and set rules, which we have plenty of them already. It's just a case of where the line is in the sand, or you try and make it in the interests of the big end of town. Having worked for a big corporate company, the only way that they would do anything good for the environment is if it was in their interest to do so. I set out from the beginning on this to show that sustainable construction would be cheaper than standard construction, because I know that that's the only way you're going to be able to persuade the big end of town to start doing the right thing. What we could do with, though, it needs to be a two-pronged attack. We can't rely exclusively on legislation to set those targets, because it's too much of an uphill battle in that context. You need both. So we need incremental pushes in the right direction from a legislative point of view, and then we need people in the industry to try and find new ways to make it in the interests of people. I'm sort of find myself, people say, what political leaning do I have? The truth is I don't really have one. I have one in every direction. But in terms of environmental, I suppose I'd be a Green. In terms of finance, I suppose I'd be a Conservative. In terms of social, I think I'd find myself more of a sort of Labour socialist type. I'm sort of bits from everywhere. In seeing that, I think that we need to do the right thing. We have to make it in people's interests to do so, as well as legislate.
So obviously this got built, it was cheaper. So are we seeing more of them? And if we're not, why not? What are the blocks?
I think what it is we are seeing it. COVID slowed everything down. I launched this for sale a week before COVID kicked in. So that did slow the process down, but I have seen this process picking up. What it is now, it's a case of scalability. So people have come to me saying, could you do this? And I've said, absolutely we could. But at the moment, I have a few projects that are going in that direction. God, it takes such a long time to get these things moving. So what I'm actually doing now is doing stuff with government involvement, i.e. on government land, buying things from the government, like this was owned by the government, and they were great. So doing more of that. And I'd hoped, having built this, there'd be a rush of developers coming to my door saying, we want you to dominate the construction market. And great. But obviously reality is a bit more complicated than that. So yes, the interest is there. Yes, the impetus is there. We still need to do more to build the supply chains and build the trade base that are familiar with this, because the idea of one builder in WA having the experience required is not competitive enough. They want to see multiple builders. So I don't want to be a monopoly on timber construction. I want other builders to get involved in it. That way there's a groundswell of competition that pushes the industry in the right direction. So I'm trying to work with the government, I'm trying to work with private industry, I'm trying to persuade other builders to get involved as well. Yeah.
Just a kind of side point on getting action on this. Somebody recently likened the trying to get action on climate change to the anti-smoking campaigns. For basically 40 years, doctors were saying, don't smoke, it will kill you. And for 50 years, the scientists have been saying, we have to do something about climate change. What finally worked with the stopping smoking was, first of all, making it socially unacceptable, which we really have to work on with climate change, is making it socially unacceptable, and then driving people out of the buildings once they had to go out and stand in the rain to smoke. So that's where the legislative backup is needed, and also the social pressure. So we can finally get some, I'm old. I'm probably not the oldest person. I'm used to being the oldest person in the room. And, we've been talking about this shit since the 1970s. So yeah, some really fast action is probably called for. Who else has a question? Yes, Matt?
Yes, directed to Patrick. How do we translate the 6 and 7 star energy rated buildings? How do we turn that into this necessary social pressure and turn that into a shift in how construction is approached?
Thank you, Matt. As a matter of fact, the neighbours rating system that was created about 20 years ago as a voluntary rating tool for office building energy efficiency. 10 years later, or not 10 years ago, 2011, has become legislation. So every office building, any office space over 1,000 meters squared that goes out to market for sale, for lease, sublease, needs to have a neighbours rating. You can't sell otherwise. Or huge penalties in the hundreds of thousands apply, not just to the landlords, but to others involved, like the property managers, etc. So at the moment, that only applies to office buildings. And they're trying to ratchet it, could be in the next round, 500 meters squared and more gets into that. But we're starting to see a coverage there, and that neighbour scheme means that, every office building has got a star rating up there. People are aware of it, and there is competition. And now, especially since COVID, we're starting to see tenancy organizations set minimum targets, saying, I'm not going into this building, or I'm going to leave that building if it's not minimum a certain amount of stars. And I think the government of WA, since almost a decade now, has got some policies to only occupy buildings that rate at least 5 stars in the base building. That's for the base building, the common areas, the lifts, the air conditioning. But then they also have targets for their own fit out to also achieve a certain neighbor's energy efficiency. There's star ratings for everything now. We're starting to see shopping centers get neighbors ratings, apartment buildings, multi-residential, data centers, hotels, hospitals have got their neighbors rating. They're working on getting a neighbors rating for warehouses, the industrial space. They've got a strategy within the next 3 years from here on, or 4. They want to cover all the major housing building types except the residential houses, so the single dwellings. That they're not going to cover that. Most interesting thing is that yesterday I saw an announcement that neighbours now are not just going to rate actual operational efficiencies around energy, water, indoor environment, and waste. They are also working on a rating tool now that is going to allow a rating for embodied carbon in the materials used to build a building. And that is targeting scope 3. That is the next elephant in the room. Yeah? We know that under net zero strategies, the government of WA is looking into net zero. What does that mean for them? It's scope 1 and 2, direct emissions, so burning of gas for the heating systems, combustion engines of their fleet, and the electricity they use, but that's it. How about all the products they purchase, all the infrastructure they build, where the product was produced offshore, overseas, or also locally, all the cement we produce, the steel we source, that is huge embodied impact. And they go into buildings, they go into everything, whatever, my watch. So we need to understand that, and we're not talking an additional 10%, we're talking what we're looking at with scope 1 and 2 is 20%. We're talking the 80% after, so that's happening before and after in our supply and in our demand chain. So neighbours is one of those schemes, and it's already got a seat in the legislation, and it's just going to become bigger because it's actually very successful, and the process is already there. The UK have just started the neighbour scheme over there. Also, New Zealand already does it. It has been shown to drive market outcomes. I think buildings 10 years ago, they were, I don't know where they were, probably around 2 or 3 stars average. Now we're at 4 stars average. We've actually reduced things. And we got the same curve also for shopping centres, following for hotels. Everyone who joins the neighbour scheme, over a few years, we're starting to see decline. Because when people measure, they manage, and they set targets, yeah? They commit, and then we start to see outcomes, and we bring people along on the journey.
Do you think the materials will actually, that are NABERS rated, will therefore have less tax applied, or obviously, well, that just makes common sense on, that's how you create jobs.
Potentially, there are different drivers in here. So, I mean, we used to have the carbon price or something like that, so that would be kind of a tax associated with it. The neighbour scheme is more of a high level, just looking at what's the overall impact and how does it compare with all the others. So it will tell you whether you're good or less good. But I think the driver will be somehow through, let's say you like wine, and you like an organic wine. Who's going to tell you that this wine is truly organic? Well, the label. And if you trust that label, you say, okay. If someone just said it's organic but there's no label with it, then you probably can't trust it. And that's the same thing with the products. Someone could say, I'm selling you green steel. And you say, hang on. Who was the association or the authority that gave you, that told you can use this kind of name for your product? Yeah? It doesn't exist yet, green steel, but we're starting to see momentum there building. And the same, I think, for concrete, we already have low carbon concrete that got environmental product declarations, and they can reduce the concretes or the cements. They can reduce the concrete's impact by around 60% because we reduce the amount of cement we use, and we supplement it with other materials like fly ash or slag. Exactly. Wonderful. So how much did you get here? 60%?
Well, I didn't measure it, but this is low carbon fly ash concrete.
Okay.
That you're standing on right now.
So there's actually a lot of concrete that has a certain fly ash content in it. So we could say it's green, but how green? And who is actually certifying that overall you've achieved a certain amount of savings? That's where you then want to get your environmental product declaration, for example, labels that have followed a certain procedure and a certain review. And based on that, for example, concrete suppliers can now even sell zero carbon concrete, so carbon neutral concrete, because they have done the work of calculating exactly how much the impact is. It's a lot better than others, so they qualify to say we've done as much as we could and the rest we offset. So we've got a carbon neutral concrete product. These things are coming up. The Climate Active, it's also a government scheme, Climate Active. That started as National Carbon Offset Scheme about a decade ago, just rebranded about 18 months ago. And we're seeing the market's going gangbusters. Everyone wants to get their products certified, or their organization, or their precinct. We can use the neighbor scheme to get a carbon neutral building. I think in Perth we've just had one now come up, the first one in Dublin, carbon neutral. So that's coming.
Sorry, just like to comment on that. Your light bulb went off when you were talking. Affordability. So the people, if we legislate, and that's all we do, if all we do is legislate, push the standards up, it will push up the cost of housing. Now, for most of the people in the market, they simply go and buy a cheaper house, but there are those people at the bottom end of the market who are right at the limit. And those are the people that we really need to be thinking of and helping most. I personally work on developments in Cottesloe, but I also work on developments that would be considered affordable and right across the gambit. And the challenges are greater in the affordable end of the market, and I relish challenges more than just simply spending money in the flash end of town, which is not hard. What we need to do is combine legislative pressure with standards. When we bought this site, you buy land off the government, you have to meet a 4-star Green Star equivalency, which is what we did. So that's a certain level, which is already legislative. There's NATA's ratings. We can introduce those, but we must do so without pushing up the cost of construction. Because the only people that are going to hurt are the people that can least afford it in our society. And we're all in this together. We need to be thinking particularly of those people and trying to provide more affordable housing whilst pushing up the standards of sustainability. And quite often they're seen as contradictory. And the challenge is to try and prove that they're not. What we could do with is exactly as you say, lowering tax on carbon positive materials. That's a great thing we should be doing. We could be doing things like stamp duty on rebates on low carbon housing. Those sort of things, positive incentives for people to do this, as much as the stick and the carrot. We need all those things from government. They can be pushing up the standards, but also giving some relief. But at the same time, private industry has a responsibility to innovate and figure out a way to get things more affordable. As I said, affordability. That is a huge challenge in Western Australia when we have these booms and busts, but there's always a group of people that are left behind, and we need to be looking after those people as much as we can. Thank you.
Just to sort of both of those points to some extent. So from what I understood, what you're saying is they're going to move to build form dwellings being having a neighbours rating. And further to your sort of point, Stuart, already, there's some, whether it shows up in modelling or not, but the benefits of living in a built form apartment like this, there's transport, less carbon from transport, things like this. And exactly to your point, potentially there's a price pressure on a built form product that's already got a lot of price pressure, and then people end up moving 3 kilometres out in a cheap dwelling. So I think that's a point to consider in legislation and other factors, because there's already a lot of pressure. There's a lot of burden of built form developments in the place.
We should be penalising this business of carving up farms miles away from the centre of town and then allowing people to have very low building quality standards on Class 1 housing. Class 2 is held to very, very high standards for obvious safety reasons. But what we should be doing is gripping those parts of the market which are allowed to slide through. So from a sprawl, urban sprawl, there's all those other whole world of environmental impacts when you start doing that. But we should start tightening the screws at that end of the market and then encouraging things at the other end of the market, where, like what we're doing here, urban infill, regeneration of this previous industrial land that we're now sitting on, and turning it into better housing for people. And we should be working hand in hand with government to do that. And we're getting there, but we can do more.
Just on that note of housing affordability, probably most of you, because you're very switched on to this, know that currently, statistically, more people die in Australia from the cold every year than die in Sweden. And the reason why that is because the person who noticed this said that our houses are glorified tents. What I observed, I live in a formerly mostly Homes West state housing area, and what I observed with my neighbors is they're sick all winter. The kids are sick all winter because their houses are freezing. And then a lot of times they're wagging school and getting in trouble through the summer because their houses are too hot to sleep in all night. So, yeah, there are big other ongoing losses because of the quality of our housing that's on the bottom end of the market. And we really need to do something to change that. And as this building proves, we can do that and actually build it for less money than what we're doing. So not doing it is just, it comes down to laziness. So, questions? Anybody else got a question? Ah, yes.
Well, this one's for Patrick. I guess firstly it's an affirmation of what you were saying about standards. So products we engage heavily with Europe, and they want us to have all the raw materials, all the embodied energy, all the embodied carbon, all the components going into our product before they're certified. So, this is what's happening in the real world. And I guess I was just curious, you said that the ratings had changed by the introduction of the battery from 4 to 7. Was it just the battery, or was there other things that helped you do that in terms of the power monitoring?
So, I said without solar and battery. Without solar and battery, the building, the common area of the building would have been rated 4.5 stars. I think there were around 10,000 kilowatt hours for the whole building as common area over a year. With solar alone, we would have been able to shave off 30% of that, because the rest would have just gone back to the grid. When the sun shines, this building doesn't need that power, so it's gone. The fact that they've added the batteries allowed some of this solar to be captured before it goes to the grid and then used in the evening when the sun's down. So that's pushed it to 60%, meaning we're now only pulling around 4,000 kilowatt hours from the grid onto this building. I think it's even less, it's 3,000 kilowatt hours. Yeah. And then that's distributed as a common cost across the 9 apartments and the office, meaning it's a really low annual bill for the common electricity.
Andrew, what's the life cycle of solar and batteries?
So the life cycle, so this is a power purchase agreement, which we own, so it's in our interest that it has the best life cycle. And it was a lengthy challenge to find products that would actually suit our needs, which was, can it stand up for 20 years? So the solar panels, that's fairly straightforward. Solar inverters about 12 years. We factor in a replacement of 12 years, but it might last 15, could die at 10. The batteries came with a 80% depth of discharge warranty at 10 years. So if it's below that, they replace it or pay us out. I think in this case, they replace it. The new models are coming with a 20-year care plan. So if there's a repair that costs more than $450 and each battery's $7,500 at the moment, they'll replace it. And that's only $750 for that. So it's almost an insurance policy. We're expecting these batteries to last at least 15 years, but it's very difficult with lithium because it is still new. It's not new, it's been on a phone for a long time, but it's new in this kind of storage situations for buildings. Down at Witchcliffe Eco Village, the Tesla power packs, they come with a 15-year warranty, 70% depth discharge. Which is unheard of, and a lot of people who are manufacturing batteries are cautious about that. But those kind of companies, we use Scenic batteries here. They're very large. They're the largest utility in Germany, and Tesla's the largest, one of the largest companies in the world now. It's just passed $1 trillion in the past 2 weeks market cap. So, are you going to argue with them? So our focus was 20 years. minimum. We expect 25 years that we hope to be passing on 30% savings versus the CNG A1 tariff or the government A1 tariff to all the residents. So for no upfront cost to Stuart or any of the people in the building, we're achieving 60 to 70% carbon emissions reductions and 30% cost savings on everyone's power bill. And we're able to achieve that through both the solar and the batteries, and equally providing everyone an equal opportunity for that cheaper renewable energy, and also with the tariff structure, so time of use energy. So every 15 minutes in this particular building, and it's the national electricity market, and we are going to move to 5-minute intervals here. And that's key, because that's when the sun shines. A cloud comes over, the sun stops shining, the batteries will kick in. If you've just got solar, it doesn't happen that way. If someone turns on their kettle and starts using a heap of electricity, that's 2 minutes of a bunch of electricity, which the sun, if it's shining, could meet, but the batteries will meet it. That's sort of the big difference, is when you use energy, demand is variable, and so is the solar and battery. But the batteries enable us to meet that variable demand, and the metering system enables us to equitably distribute the benefit.
Have you got questions? Yes, Matt?
A question for Brad. You might be uniquely positioned to answer a question like this. We saw less than a decade ago the vision of the NBN effectively destroyed by politicising the issue and right before an election. As a Green senator, how do you approach legislation and trying to push cultural change where it is such an easy issue to push into identity politics and make people turn against what should be the values that everyone should be in?
Great question, Matt. And it is probably the frustration of this decade. It's been the politicisation of what Malcolm Turnbull, who's put up with this, says is physics. The decarbonisation of the planet it's a matter of science and physics. It's not a matter of politics, but it's become one. And so I keep returning to that. And I think, to be honest with you, it sounds like a bit of a glib answer in some ways, but it's things like this, around getting all of us talking about it, and then putting pressure up through government around actually saying people of all kinds want action in this space. And so I'm having similar conversations with the agricultural sector, because I think every sector kind of gets the opportunity. And the way that I've tried to go around the politics is actually in that space of opportunity. And I think we're seeing that this could be extraordinary for Western Australia if we grasp that. A place of extraordinary sun, wind, land and capable people all in one place is pretty rare. And if you want to be a place that is Ross Scotto says, a renewable energy superpower, that this is where you do it. And that shouldn't be political. But that said, to be really frank and honest, it's been much more challenging than I hoped. So I'll be up front with you. When I first got to Parliament, I wrote to all of the parties and said, climate is important. I think we should all just get together without the politics and work out what we're going to do. I only had one party agree to do that. The other two were like, not interested. And that was pretty interesting. That party was the Nationals. Not what you'd expect. Who actually wanted to be part of that conversation. So it's actually really hard. And the challenge of this state is we've got a Labor government which actually has a great promise, great opportunity, a huge majority in the Parliament. They could do stuff, but they're going to need to be actually probably me annoying them in the Parliament helps a little bit, but what's going to help even more is people pushing them up to do it.
I think the other thing, just to kind of circle back to that again, what we have to push for, what this building has proved, is that acting on climate change is a good business model. It actually saves money. Circling back to the comments about affordable housing, it costs 2 to 3 times more to do nothing about homelessness, to just leave them on the street, than it does to provide people with safe permanent housing. And we really have to be pushing that message that we want our tax dollars spent effectively, and buildings like this are the way to do it. And stop basically pissing money up against the wall by not solving these problems. Have we got any more questions? Somebody who's feeling shy at the back, and yeah, wasn't really. Yes, good. I love a good question. Chris, please.
With Europeans going ahead, pushing ahead with degassing, that means not burning fossil fuel for heating. What is Australia doing in that response? I know that financially, gas is still cheaper for heating compared to electricity.
Well, I've recently just finished a legal case with regards to, well, 2 legal cases that I've been working on, which I can't mention what the matters are, but the data shows that there's a drastic reduction in the cost of heating, about a 60 to 70% reduction in cost by using heat pumps to heat hot water, whether it be for replacing gas heating in houses for space heating, or for heating hot water, domestic hot water. And that is a huge saving. The coefficient of performance, the efficiency, is around, on average, 4 times more efficient to use a heat pump type of air conditioning system or hot water system than it is to use gas, which is less than 1 unit of gas, or of energy of gas, produces less than 1 unit of hot water. As opposed to if using a heat pump, you're around 4 units of hot water to every 1 unit of electricity. And it's a huge saving, especially when you add it up over the life cycle of a building, 20, 25 years. Just for heating for 4 months of the year, which people tend to forget in Perth and Western Australia, especially the southwest, that we actually need to heat our buildings, that they actually do get cold. And the amount of commercial buildings that we see with just cooling only solutions put in that are absolutely freezing during winter is pretty bonkers, to be honest, especially when we're talking about billion-dollar type assets that have decided to just put in cooling, potentially because gas heating is too expensive, but at what cost? At the cost of people's comfort. But whilst gas is cheaper to install, absolutely, heat pumps are more expensive, generally 2 or 3 times more expensive. We aim to provide solutions to that so that they don't get designed out, because the first thing that happens is, when we're building a building like this and or any project, is that cost comes. The cost of the build and what's it going to cost to the end user. As Stuart said before, how do we keep that cost of the house or the land or whatever that case may be, the cost of the building down. So, we've come up with a solution here with the solar and the batteries. Batteries are extremely expensive. Don't get me wrong, they're expensive. But the benefits over the long run are the same in terms of transitioning away from gas. The UK don't allow gas to be installed at all in new buildings from 2025. So they're 100% transitioning away from gas. It's the end of gas. that's something that we probably should look to legislate here in Australia, at least for new land developments, 100% electric buildings. So you can't get a Green Star rating, correct me if I'm wrong, if you install gas in a building.
They're not running out of gas in the UK. Doesn't help.
And the price of gas is extremely variable. If you can generate electricity, use it in the building far more efficiently, using a lot less energy. So energy efficiency is key. Then you don't need to spend as much on generation and storage, and that they're keys. So our aim is to provide energy efficient air conditioning systems that provide comfortable year-round solutions to people, as well as hot water that's energy efficient, and take that capital cost burden away from the developers such as Stuart and others, or strata companies and communities, and give them the long-term benefits, forge a long-term relationship, make it equitable, and share the benefits, and really work towards getting those 100% electric buildings that are lower the cost of living.
Actually, it's a good point you just make about the cost of things. Everyone has this perception that developers are there making tons and tons of money, but frankly, it's not the case. Some of them get lucky, but the majority of the market forces out there dictate, and the primary dictator of profit margins on a development are the banks. So you can take a feasibility model to them, and unless you're hitting a certain threshold, a certain percentage return, you don't get the money for it. So when I'm talking about trying to get these developments up and running to do this, relieving us of capital cost doesn't go into the pocket of the developer. It goes towards lowering the cost of the development so that the margins that the banks demand can be met. Because if anyone doesn't have a conscience, it's the banks and the private lenders when it comes to environmentalism quite often. That's changing. The banks are starting to get wise to it. Private lenders, no. But some of the bigger backers of bigger projects like super funds, they're waking up to it. But at the end of the day, the developer is only making as much money as the banks tell him he has to, otherwise there is no deal. So this is when, as a developer, if I can reduce the costs of the project, we can sell it more competitively, and we make only what the banks demand is to be made. So this is not about, someone, the fat cat's running off with tons of dough. The idea here is to try and meet the requirements set by the industry, and then put more product into the marketplace at a more affordable price to then take market share, for example. Or that's what, there's different ways for businesses to make money. But we need to, unfortunately, consider those commercial realities when we price these projects, so that when they talk about getting these capital costs down, it's going into the pockets of the people who buy the properties, and then everyone else who demands what they demand in order to make it happen. Thanks.
And just to kind of circle around on that last question, the most efficient energy and the most cost-effective energy is the energy you don't use. So what we haven't been seeing here in Western Australia, it's still very much a niche product, is the passive solar buildings, the energy effective buildings. I was doing an interview back in July. It was the first really, really bitterly cold day that we had during the winter. Walked into the house, and it was almost a little too warm in there. And the film crew that I was with, I looked around, they were all in their stocking feet. The first thing they did was take their shoes off, because it was so cozy in there. And I said, are you running an air conditioner? He said, nope, that's just the sun. It had been raining for 3 days, and it was freezing outside. But the house was almost a little too warm by design. And that needs to become the standard. That needs to become the expectation, that if people walk into a house and it's not 7, 8 stars, they just circle around and walk back out again because they have no interest in being doomed to a lifetime of high energy costs. Now, we're actually over time because the questions are so good. One surprise. Does anybody else just have a last burning question?
Well, it's a problem I had with rebuild our house. I'm rural. When we were looking at the house, we wanted to build a fairly efficient house. We also were keen on timber. Unfortunately, we ended up getting forced to have to use steel as our construction material to meet our DeHavilland ratings.
You were given the bum steer, I'm afraid. I know I've been in the same situation. So I built houses rurally as well. I used to live in the country, and I was asked to build a fireproof house in the bush, and it was all steel, like you say. The owner now regrets that deeply. And actually, I did an extension on a house in the country with steel framing for the same reason, and put a huge scar in the back of my hand. And I remember saying to myself at the time, I'm going to let that scar up as a reminder to myself never to build in steel again. Light gauge steel is terrible stuff. We get heat bleeds through it that start to literally make burn marks on the inside of the plasterboard of the building. I've seen it. What you can do is what we've done here is you have to upgrade the standard of construction. This is what I was going back to, this business of Class 1 housing with much lower building standards than Class 2. You could have done it. It might have cost you more than the bog standard available. But what you can do here is we use fire check plasterboard on the inside and the outside of the timber frame. And then you sock it on the outside of that. I'm going to start getting all technical now, sorry, I'll go off on one. And then you fire protected the timber to a much, much higher standard. But it's a detail that's not common in Class 1, it's generally in Class 2. But the people giving you that advice obviously would have just been thinking in terms of Class 1 housing. But yeah, I feel your pain with the steel construction stuff. Although steel elements are very useful, don't get me wrong, but they should, all building elements like concrete or steel, like you can see in here, their purpose in a structure should be to facilitate the performance of the environmentally high-performing products. So whatever steel and concrete we use is designed to enable and enhance the performance of the timber, and that's a slightly different way of thinking.
And just on the fire rating, in America, if a building has a steel-framed roof, it has a label on the outside of it for the fire department to know, because you get a fire in there and the building collapses, folds up like a house of cards on the fireys who are trying to put the fire out. So, yeah, scary. Yes, Len, you're back again.
Just interested, Stuart, we just circling on the gas issue. Do you have gas connected here, and were you required to connect?
Absolutely not, and no.
How do you really feel?
Yeah. No, don't need it. Yeah, and then the point about firing, I was a volunteer urban firefighter when I lived in the country. I've been into some burning buildings. I'd much rather go into a burning timber building than I would in a steel or concrete building, because timber burns predictably. You can look at a structure and know when it's going to come down, whereas with steel and concrete, they have catastrophic failures at the weakest point and then comes down like a house of cards. It's a completely different process. Timber buildings are safer than a standard building in terms of fire. And as it is, the fire standards that are required for Class 2 are so high, you are much safer in a timber building that's on fire than you are in a standard building that's on fire. But that's the message we need to get out there. Most people don't know. They think timber, it burns. It's not that simple.
I think we might leave it there. The questions have been great. Thank you. Vindication. They wanted to talk all night. They love talking about this stuff. Cool. I think there's more pizza there. We're all going to be here for a while. We don't have to be out of this. Oh, and he's going to do the nickel tour. That's cool. It will cost you a nickel, but yes. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. That's been fantastic.